Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a little shop of horrors, otherwise known as a Warframe video. Most of us, or at least the observant ones of us, may have noticed an odd growth in our ships recently. One that seems to have a disturbing tendency to eat all our food and do strange things with our pets. In all seriousness, no, the Helminth is a new system that we've actually briefly discussed in a previous video. But today, I want to delve into this new piece of content that makes us question if we're really into Vor or not. As in reality, this new system is possibly one of the most transformative updates we've had in a very long time that can truly help you personalize the game in a way that we have yet to be able to do so in the past by sacrificing one frame and donating an ability from that frame to another frame. This ability then gets stored and you can kind of transfer it to any other frame you so choose. Now, speaking of personal choice, it is your personal choice as to whether you follow me on Twitter and Twitch, but if I may encourage you to go down to the description, there's a link to my Twitter and Twitch down there. It would mean a lot to me if you could follow for daily streams and daily updates in general. Now, this is going to be an ultimate beginner's guide, so to say. So we're going into this video with the idea that even a complete novice is going to be able to take away how useful the Helminth will be for them once they get to it in their progression. Or maybe to give a more experienced player a breakdown of a system that they can then add into their repertoire. Also to give you the kind of idea as to why and what the Helminth can offer you. Keeping in mind that the most important thing here is that the Helminth is not a mandatory system. All it serves as is another system for you to sink your teeth into as a way to adjust and personalize your own power fantasy within Warframe. So what is the Helminth? Other than being very hard to say
Helminth
and very confusing in its terminology, the Helminth is a system you unlock at Mastery Rank 8, and to get full access to it, you also then need to get it installed into your ship like a typical ship component. This component then comes from Sun at the rank of Associate on the Heart of Deimos content on Deimos itself. Once installed, you may then take a seat and activate the overlay for your Helminth and be very, very concerned about where that pokey pointy needle might be going. For the beginner's perspective, let's break down how the Helminth works, shall we? To get the most out of it, you will need to level your Helminth up. Your Warmouth needs feeding to sustain it. The hunger requirements equals food. The more food you give it, the more XP you generate towards your XP bar. Then to expand on that, donating abilities and sacrificing frames will also then help up the leveling process as well. Now, it's worth noting that the Helminth does come with its initial array of unique abilities, and you do unlock more as you level up the Helminth. I would advise giving these a dabble with because some of them are actually kind of disgusting in how much potency they can add to your frame. So the core of the Helminth is the feeding of it, and in a way, this is almost the most literal depiction of a resource dump you'll ever see in Warframe. This will all allow you to feed the Helminth all your excess materials to keep topping up its quote-unquote secretions. What a delightful terminology. As you allow your Helminth to consume things, these secretion meters will fill up. And these secretion meters are what you're going to need as a resource in order to actually insert abilities into other frames and to also subsume things. The secretions and their resources they need are the following, but as a quick TLDR, keep in mind they will likely be adding more and changing around the quantities and equations of how much are required of each resource. So just realize that this might not be too accurate when you end up watching it. So the first of the secretions are oxides. These will make use of alloy plates, carbides, ferrite, gallium, oxium, salvage, tellurium, and titanium. Calx secretions then needs asterite, cubic diodes, gallows rods, groctrol, hexanon, iridite, lucent terragloves, nullstones, and rubido. The biotics secretion will require you to feed the Helminth dust-like
Sarracenia?
Question mark? Frost leaves, gangilians, gorgaceous spores, lunar pitchers, mapricos, moonlight dragonfly, moonlight jadeleaf, moonlight thrashcone, mitocardia spores, nistlepods, pustulite, rux claws, sunlight dragon lily, sunlight jadeleaf, sunlight thrashcone, tepia nodules, and veston moss. Synthetics will then require you to feed the Helminth Orcrux capacitors, circuits, control modules, detonite ampules, filtering samples, Kesslers, comms, neural sensors, oricon cells, and pollen bundles. This almost sounds like I'm reading off a menu for McDonald's, doesn't it? Yes, I'll have a number 2, please. Pheromones will then ask for brachoids, chitinous husks, infected palpitors, mutant samples, nanospores, neurodes, plastids, pulsating tubercules, pustules, severed bile sacs, and trachons. The amount of each of these resources you will need will be shown on stream, but again, the numbers of these required will likely change over the course of time, so do keep that in mind. And finally, bile. Bile secretion will ask you to donate argon crystals, copernix, cryotic diluted thermia, fresnels, isos, morphics, thermosludge, and somatic fibers. Once you've leveled up your Helminth to a certain point, you will then be able to donate sentient-related materials. These will then be generalized to one of your choice, with anomaly shards, cetus wisps, intact sentient cores, exceptional sentient cores, and flawless sentient cores making up these donatable materials. The important things to note when it comes to feeding Mr. Big Lips over here, and that is that it's very much like a toddler. He has his own likes and dislikes and will probably vomit up anything he doesn't particularly want to eat in the first place. If you feed him too much of one thing, he'll get less of a refill to that category of secretion, and that will then show as a dislike icon in the form of a red arrow. The fuller the red arrow, the less you will gain to that secretion for feeding him that item. And likewise, if he's craving something, you'll get far bigger refill to that category if there's a green arrow on it. The fuller the green arrow, the more he'll gain. This then helps you make more efficient use of your resources. This is something you should be taking advantage of, as even if you have an abundance of some of the resources, the Helminth will likely get bored if you end up feeding him 1,000,001,000 nanospores, as the amount you're going to need if it was comparative to a craving of his would be 50 times more than the base minimum. This mechanic is in essence a way to try and get you to go out there and farm things you would otherwise not farm, like Railjack, for example, or the open world segments for more variety in your Helminth diet. So now that you've kept Barbara Streisand on a diet over here full, you can now start looking at how to best implement the Helminth in your personal play. Again, realize, and this is probably the most important part, this is all personal choice, and that anything you see in a YouTube video or a guide from other places, and anything I will say about the Helminth will come down to preference of choice. I just want to make sure you know the systemic nature of everything that goes on with this big lipped mouth thing, and that way you can then implement it into your own gameplay experience. The way you do that all comes down to you, however. First things first, for you to transfer abilities, you need to sacrifice a frame. It should be noted that only the regular version of a frame can be subsumed, and primes and umbrals cannot. The frame does not need to be leveled, and the ability that can be subsumed has been predetermined by DE. For a full list of the abilities that each frame can donate, please check the list of frames and their respective abilities through a link I'll have down in the description. Then, once selected, that frame will have a real bad time and be hooked up to the wall like a Christmas ornament. It will then take 24 hours for that frame to be subsumed. Once subsumed, it's gone for good, and a lovely dainty flower will then appear to designate the frame's ability that is now present within the Helminth. So yes, you can in fact build a shrubbery. It is worth noting, however, that some abilities do have limitations or have been reduced in efficiency, such as Valkyr's Warcry. This is to make sure that there's still some reason to use their original versions. Things like damage buffs, such as Roar and Eclipse, are limited to 1 per frame. So if you have Rhino, you can't put Eclipse on Rhino, as that would be 2 buff abilities. So unfortunately, no double damage buffing for the sake of buffs, I'm afraid. Something else that's worth noting is that you can only have 1 subsumed ability active on a loadout at once, but you can have multiple loadouts with different subsumed abilities. Let's say, for example, if you wanted Excalibur here, for example, that you could have Excalibur have a default loadout on his A loadout, which would be his normal kit, and then on loadout B, you could subsume Warcry. You could then use loadout C to have a different ability, such as Mag's Pull added in. Oh, and before we forget, augments used for said subsumed abilities are then also placeable on the frame you've Frankensteined together. So Valkyr's Eternal War can then be used on any frame you subsumed Warcry to, etc, etc. Now this next segment is completely unscripted. I didn't write a single thing for this bit because I thought, honestly, the Helminth is about personal power fantasy, and I want to talk about how to choose what abilities for what frames, because there's no real clear-cut way of doing it, but there are certain things to look at in terms of whether you want to optimize your build or whether you just want to serve a personal power fantasy or not. We could spend hours, and I could list off every frame which is going to be optimal for the choice of abilities and subsumed abilities. But really, the biggest fact of all this, as I mentioned previously, is it all comes down to personal preference. There are absolutely going to be some good choices for certain frames. One of these things that you can look at is how relevant a subsumed ability is for a certain frame. Things such as Rhino's Roar, things such as Eclipse, or things such as Warcry from Valkyr. These are abilities that are going to serve a good purpose on every single frame you use. The way to look at this is, if you want simplicity, you go for a subsumed ability that is general purpose, something that will help you across the entire spectrum of your frame's abilities. Let's say, for example, with our Excalibur, or any frame for that matter. If we put Roar on a frame from Rhino, we know that we're going to get a guaranteed damage bonus or a power strength bonus. This is always a good choice because it means that you're going to benefit no matter what you do with it. In terms of the ability you get rid of, it's again a bit down to personal preference, but you want to get rid of the ability that is the least impactful. Some frames require a lot more ability synergy to make use of their full kit. So if you were using Baruch, for example, you definitely wouldn't want to get rid of his Lull or his Desolate Hands, for example, because they are needed to make sure that his kit is complete. Whereas with a frame like Excalibur, you could get rid of Dash, you could get rid of Radial Blind, and his overall effectiveness hasn't really been diminished. But the way we choose this will dictate based on which ability we're subsuming and which ability on which frame is going to change. You can see why there's a lot of minutiae when it comes into deciding what to replace and what to use. The best way to make an informed decision with this is to have a 3-step process. 1, know the frame you're subsuming. 2, know the frame you're putting that subsumed ability into. And 3, and the most important, is relativity. And 4, as maybe a bit of a catheter to that, you could then put in personal preference of playstyle. Not everything needs to be optimal. You can always go into this with the idea of just having that ultimate path fantasy of wanting to see a Rhino mag pull things for all its glory, or maybe having Nourish on Ember because it's cool. At the end of the day, that is what comes down to the ultimate choice of what you choose. And the thing to realize is this Helminth system is something you get access to much later down the line anyway. So the game is naturally assuming you're going to have some understanding of frame mechanics when you go into using this. I admittedly would have liked to have seen this being used at Master Rank 15 like it was initially intended, but hey ho, pickers can't be choosers. The idea is, before you subsume an ability for all seriousness, you want to make sure you have some understanding of the frame and the ability you're going to subsume first if you want to be optimal. Unless, of course, it is for the sake of that preference of choice. But if you make a choice that you don't like, you can very simply and very easily retract that by using the remove subsumed ability from the Helminth options. Now, in essence, the Helminth is a pretty simplistic system. The complexity comes with understanding how the subsumed ability will affect your frame at the end of it all. But let's face it, the Helminth is not designed to be a new player incentivized mechanic in of itself. It is designed as an extension once you have a fundamental understanding of the game. And I think that you shouldn't look at the Helminth system as a mandatory system. It's something you use and something you can look into working with more once you've had a bit more of an experience of the storyline and once you have more understanding of the systemic nature of the game. Don't see the Helminth as a pillar of content that you must do. But if there's ever a point in your time of playing Warframe where you think, I think my Excalibur could be different and better with this combination of what if my Rhino had Mag's Pull or Nourish, or what if I was able to have Firewalker on Frost and be completely contradictory to the nature of the frame? That is what the Helminth is used for. And in essence, it doesn't need much explaining, but it's worth getting into the right mindset with it. And that is what this video has been for. And I realize the irony of having a new players incentivized video for a mechanic that's at Master Rank 8, but hey ho. So whether it's for the memes, whether it's for the variety, I hope this video has been informative. Hopefully you get some use out of it, and hopefully this will help inform players who are new to the game what the Helminth will have in store for them. If you've liked this video, please leave a comment down below as to what kind of monstrosities you've been forming, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next video. Ta-ra!